How are we doing, everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we are talking about key components of a professional golf swing. Professional golf swings have to do a few things, right? They are trying to find a way to hit the ball straight, which means that they have to get good angles from a geometry perspective and swing the club on plane. But they're also trying to hit it far, which means that they're going to use forces and pressure and muscles and leverage to their, capability, if you like. So we're going to focus on some of the key components of things that I've talked about on the channel recently, and we're going to put them together. And we're probably going to focus on about 3/4 areas where we kind of see the biggest difference between a professional and amateur golf swing. Now, the first thing is that in the backswing, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to swing the club on plane, which means that we need to trigger a hip rotation. We're also trying to put pressure into the ground to use to our advantage, but also very important in transition, which I'll come to. So that means we've got to find a way to put pressure in towards the floor. And we need to create leverage, which means that we need to swing the club as high as we can on the way back, because it helps us, or it helps professional golfers use gravity to their advantage when it comes to using things like distance, right? So to break it down, once in posture, the idea is that if I turn my hips in towards the trail leg whilst trying to keep the trail leg bent, one, it activates a huge amount of force underneath the trail side. Two, it really puts pressure into the ground, so it stabilizes this leg, which will be key in the transition. Three, activates muscles in this area. And four, it means that you don't move forward and you stay in your angles, right? So it means you maintain your posture. So instead of doing things like this that we see with amateur golfers, they're turning into that leg for a numerous amount of reasons. As they swing up to the top, they're trying to create leverage. That's much more simplistic. Now, the only thing you've got to be slightly careful of is one of the variances which will change how things look would be how a golfer grips it. So some professionals grip it more in the fingers, some professionals grip it more in the palm. And that's why some golfers will look like they have more angulation in the back of the wrist between the relationship of the arm, and some golfers will potentially look much flatter. So those things are potential characteristic traits and things that I'm trying to talk about on the channel in more detail now. So we're going to ignore the kind of things that can look slightly different. So we're at the top of the backswing. We have created leverage with the arms by using the trail hand to help pull us back. We have triggered a rotation of the pelvis to help us swing the club on plane. We have maintained flexion in this leg so we can put pressure in the ground, but it also helps us stay in posture and not drift around. Now, momentarily in the downswing, the weight needs to stay on that trail side whilst we trigger a separation. Separation basically means the lower body is leading the downswing. If you do not separate, two things are going to happen. One, you're going to swing over the top, and two, your head would move as well, right? So as I start to move the lower body to initiate the downswing, what I would say is that professional golfers look different in this respect, right? Some golfers look incredibly central. Some golfers look like they start to move more in towards the lead side. You have to start opening the pelvis whilst the weight is on the trail side in the golf swing. Now, the thing that we've got to be careful of, and hopefully today's video will clear this up, is that, every golfer would be slightly different. And this movement of the hips and this squaring of the hips happens very, very quickly. So you've got to be careful at what point are you trying to focus your attention on. So I swing up towards the top, my weight is on the trail side due to the rotation of my hips. My weight is distributed between the outside part of my right foot and my right heel. As I start to open the hips to initiate a separation, and you can see the way as I start to lead with my lower body, my weight would stay on this lead side, on my trail side, sorry, I should say, as I start to turn my hips so they go back to square to target. Now, like I said, some golfers it would look slightly differently. Some golfers would get the weight in the trail side and they would start to open the hips as they look like they move a little bit more laterally. The point is it doesn't necessarily matter, but you've got to be careful with the idea of if I'm going to move left, you don't want to shift your weight entirely left immediately, because then it's going to become very difficult, if not almost impossible, to open the hips enough upon the position of impact. So my advice to most golfers is definitely the golf swing and the greatest golf swings are very heavily rotational based. So don't sacrifice your rotation in your swing. So therefore don't really focus too much on linear movements, in my opinion. The weight will shift back in towards the lead heel based on the hip rotation. So again, the biggest difference that we see between amateurs and professional golfers is that the professional golfer will keep the arm in the air. So as I start to open my hips, my arms are still in the air. As I continue to rotate my hips, now my pelvis is starting to get back to square to target. My weight, because my pelvis is re-rotated, has started to redistribute itself back in towards the lead heel. But you can see all of that has happened whilst my arm is still heavily elevated in the sky. So it means I've got all this leverage as I come down to pull the club and to use gravity towards my advantage. Now, in my opinion, those are the biggest differences. Most amateur golfers don't load correctly and they don't basically get the backswing correct, and therefore they can't transition to full effect. But that's what we see amongst professional golfers. Now, so I swing up, right? I start to open up. Yes, there might be differences in terms of some pros look different, but effectively that's the key thing to understand, is that you want to open the hips whilst the weight is in the trail side, and then based on the hip squaring, the weight will then redistribute itself back into the heel. Which basically means that as I start to come down, you can see the way my arms are still well up in the air and my weight has re-established itself back onto the lead heel. Now, as I continue to rotate, which means I continue to turn my hips will eventually max out at this sort of position. Okay, so I can't trigger any more rotation unless I start to continue to use the ground more to my advantage by doing things like lifting my heel up in the air. Now, by lifting the heel up in the air, basically means that I can now hold on to my angles that I've created, so all this wrist cock much later in towards impact, which means I only need a small amount of squaring of the club face at the very much the last minute of hitting the ball. But as we see with professional golfers, their shoulders are so open relative to the target line, so is the pelvis. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to do the things that I've discussed. Now, look, it's really important in this video to establish that, you know, this isn't just all I advocate and all I teach. It's very difficult for amateur golfers to be able to demonstrate these positions. So that's why I always break things down and I talk about things that are absolutely acceptable. But the reason why a professional golfer would generally look this way at impact based on things like shaft lean would be based on the fact that because they've opened the shoulders, if you like, so much, the opening of the shoulders is helping them get the club face square. They're not needing to do too much with the wrist at the bottom part of the swing due to the fact of how open they are. So if you're somebody who loves professional golf swings, is it something you can emulate? Of course it is. You just need to learn how to move. Like I said, it's, you know, I teach golfers all the time. It's what I do all the time, and I can get golfers looking this way at the top of the backswing. You can educate people how to separate so they look more this way. And you can educate people how to get more open at the point of impact, like I said earlier, by using the ground and understanding how things should generally be perceived and how things should feel. But those are the biggest differences, and that's how professional golfers swing. Backswing is about using the ground, right? You've got to use the ground, you've got to push this in here. Because like I said, we need to maintain angles as we start the downswing. So we don't want this leg being all flimsy, because as you pull this hip back, this would fly forward. So the backswing is all about putting pressure in towards the floor. Turn the pelvis into the leg, create elevation. The idea in the separation is move the lower body first. But again, we have to maintain our posture. So that's why there's so much pressure under here that this isn't going anywhere, this leg. This leg is staying there as I start to open my hips. Then as I continue to unwind my shoulders and hips, I would then start to allow my feet to lift to give me that extra bit of rotation, which means I can get the club face virtually on the back of the ball without having to use too much of the wrists and hands, which is why we see pros that look so much this way. So if you're somebody whose impact position doesn't necessarily look desirable, then you've got to be careful. You can't just do things with your hands and your arms to do it. It's going to come from very much a rotation, which is why I talk so much about it on the channel. The only grey area is that kind of transitional area where I know golfers look different in terms of this position, but my advice is that you just need to be slightly careful, that you need to start transitioning, which means opening the hips for that separation whilst the weight stays on that trail side, even though it's only very, very momentarily happening at that position. So those are some of the key things. That's why the golfers have the ability to hit the ball straight, because of the ability to stay in posture means they can swing the club on plane. That's the reason why they can hit the ball so far, because they use the ground, but also because they create tremendous amounts of leverage, so they can use gravity to their advantage. And also the reason why they can control the stability of the club face is because of how open the body is, which means there's very little manipulation of the face throughout the swing. Those are the kind of nutshells in terms of what a professional golfer is doing, generally speaking. Of course there's variances. Of course there are golfers that don't hit it as far and they move differently. But the ones that we get so attracted to, and that's generally what we tend to see in terms of their ability to hit it far and their ability to hit it straight. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Right, always appreciate a thumbs up and a like, and remember it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you're gonna do that, then you might as well press the little bell icon, because that means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. It's absolutely free to send swings into the channel. In the description box below is where you'll see the links to my social media pages, which is where you can send the swings in and I basically annotate over them, republish them back onto the channel as soon as I possibly can. It's absolutely free for you to do. Those are your key tips out of this video today. I'll catch up with you guys again soon.